Hello and welcome everyone to yet another Empower session. Today we will be looking at leveraging input controls in low-code apps. Let's have a look at what is on the agenda. First of all, what are controls? Which ones do we have? What is the common ground between these controls? Are there specifics to a certain control? Then do they expose actions? And then we'll do some exercises as well. Now, what are controls? Controls are the most primitive building blocks that we have in low-code apps. They are very small and they do one thing. They accept input from the user. So these are used to gather information from the user. They are typically DataMiner agnostic, which means that it's not known or related to a DataMiner concept. No, we're dealing with texts, with numbers, with dates, and so forth. They also accept and expose data. We'll get into that in a few minutes. And then, our inputs are typically used as a data source for other functionality. That means that by itself, an input control gathers information, but we still need to do something with that information. So let's have a look at the input controls that we have. Here in this slide, we see that we have a numeric input. For instance, you want to gather a bandwidth. That means it's a number. Then we have a search input and a text input, which are related. They both gather some text. One is designed for search purposes, while the other one is more generic for text in general. Then we also have the time range component that allows selecting a range. So basically 2 dates, you select the start time and an end time. Then we have the toggle button, which allows the user to opt in or opt out of something. And then we have the drop down, which allows the user to select one value out of a few. What is the common ground between these two controls? So they all accept data. And whenever an input control accepts data, we use that data to set the initial value for that control. Whenever that input data changes, we actually also update the value in our input control. Input controls also output some data, and that is the data that is being generated by the control, and it is available for use in your low-code app. That output data is available in the components data section and is from that moment onwards able to be used by other functionality. We also have some options that are similar for our input controls. First of all, the label. The label is the text that is displayed before the control. Quite simple. It explains typically in one word what the control is about. Then we have an inline option that controls if the label and the input control should be rendered on the same line or not. Then we have a placeholder, which is the text that is shown in the control when no value is present. And then we have an icon, which is a nice visual indicator within the control. We also have some functional options. And these functional options, the first one determines when a value is being emitted. And we have 3 options there. We want to expose the value that is available in our control whenever the user hits enter or return on their keyboard. Or we can say whenever the control loses focus, from that moment we want to expose the new value in our control. Or we can say we just do it whenever the value changes. So for a text input, this would mean whenever I hit a key on my keyboard, the value is being updated. We have a last functional option that determines the default value for our control. Let's have a look. Over here, I have a low-code app. It's brand new, just being created. And at the bottom, we have our basic controls. To add a control to our low-code app, we take one, we click and we drag. So here we have added a text input to our low-code app. If I go to the layout options, be mindful that we have component over there. That means that we need to select the text input. If we don't have the text input selected, you'll see that that component label is gone. So be sure to select your text input, and then we have access to the layout options of our component. In here, we have several sections. And in the advanced section, we can control how the text input should look like. So let's say we want to create a search input. And whenever I add the label, you see that it is being added to our input as well. I can click inline to make sure that they are rendered next to each other. I can put in a placeholder. Perhaps people should be entering in an ID in here. And I can fill in an icon as well. Let's use a search icon, something like that. And you can see that our input control already looks a bit nicer. Now that we have our layout options, I want to talk a bit about this emit value setting. To explain how it works, I'm actually going to copy or create a duplicate of my text input. So let me duplicate this one, and I'm going to put it at the bottom. So now we have two text inputs, and I'm going to link one to the other. So I'm going to use the value of my first text input as the default for my second text input. I can do so by going to Components, in the Data section, and here I see my two components. If I expand the text input, you see that it emits text data. So it outputs text data. So I'm going to take the value from my first input. I'm going to add it as data on my second input. And let's see how this behaves. Let me preview the app. So I can say I'm going to search for the Olympics. I have typed in my first input, but the value is not shown in my second input. Why is that? It's because the value only emits whenever I hit enter or whenever I lose focus. So if I hit enter, you see that the value is now exposed as a value on my first input, and it's immediately being fed to my second component. But perhaps I want to have these two components in sync. Let me do that. I select my first text input, and I go to the settings, and I click value change. If I now preview again, and I start typing in here, you see that my values are in sync. Something like that. Let's talk about some control specifics. So let's start with the text input. Text input, quite simple. It accepts text and it outputs text as well. And we have a unique behavior for our text input, which is a multi-line option. And whenever you enable this multi-line option, the text input will grow in size. It will take all of the available height, and it will allow users to view more text in there. This is typically used for descriptive inputs. We also have this search input. Same thing here. It inputs and outputs text. And it has another unique behavior. So no multi-line in this one, because that doesn't make a lot of sense to search for something. Instead, we have a clearable flag, which allows the user to easily clear the search term by clicking the cross on the right-hand side. Then we have a numeric input. The numeric input inputs and outputs a number. Easy. But then we have 4 options that are specific to numbers. First of all, the unit. The unit can be quite important if the user needs to fill in a bit rate. Is it like in kilobits or megabits? That's important to know. So adding a unit can give some context to the user. Then we have a step size, which is the minimum change allowed to the value. This minimum change is typically used whenever you hit the arrows on the right-hand side of our numeric input. Then we have the number of decimals, which configures the precision of the value, if you're dealing with decimals, of course. And then we have a minimum and a maximum, so you can define a valid range that could be useful. Perhaps you're dealing with the percentage, so then a 0 to 100 makes a lot of sense. Lastly, we have the drop-down input, which is a bit more elaborate. There we see that the drop-down input accepts a lot of different data types. And here we see some DataMiner types, so elements, services, GQI queries, tables. And the nice thing is that whatever you give as input is also available as output. So if I show a list of elements, if I select an element, then we also have that element available as an output. We also have some options for the drop-down, so select first item by default. Of course, when you initially open a page containing a drop-down, we will select the first item that is available. Allow clearing the selection is a second option, which will show or hide a cross that allows clearing the selection on the right-hand side. And then specifically for GQI data, we have the ability to select a display column. So it could be that you have several columns in your data set, but you want to use one specific column to be rendered in the dropdown. All right. Let's do an exercise together. If you go to the catalog and you search for app inputs, you'll find this item over here. I suggest deploying this package on your system, and once complete, you will have this low-code app available. This low-code app consists of several exercises. Let's do the first exercise. So the first exercise is about a dynamic query filter. Here we build a simple but powerful filter for a table component using inputs. We have some data, which is a table containing some information about satellites. We have a column that contains the ID, we have a display name, and we have a type. And we have an assignment. Add a search and a drop-down component to the page. Apply the text feed of the search component as a filter to the table. Add the satellite types variable to the drop-down component. And lastly, in the satellites query, add a filter node. Filter all rows that have a value for the type column equal to the selected item in the drop-down component. All right. That's quite the exercise. You'll see in practice, it's quite straightforward. But let me explain this low-code app. You have a few buttons at the bottom. Start will deploy an exercise for you in a different low-code app where you can play around with it. If you hit a restart, you basically start again from scratch. And then you have a help me page, which will describe how you can do it step by step. You even have this apply the solution option available. If you click that, it will deploy the solution for you as well. Let's do the exercise together. So we hit start. So we have our table data visible already, and now we needed to add a text input and use it as a filter. So you'll see at the bottom we have our basic controls, and we want to use a search input. So not a text input, a search input. And we can style it a bit. Perhaps I'm going to add search and say it's inline. And we want to use this text input, the value that is now present. We want to use this as a filter on our table. So you select text and you hit the plus sign on the filter of your table. And if I now preview my app, you see I have my search bar in here. And if I type echo and hit enter, we see that our data set only contains echo. There was a second part of this exercise, which allowed or will allow us to use the drop-down component. So we add the drop-down component to our page, and then you'll see that we have a variable available, which is called satellite types. And if you edit the satellite types and have a look at the default value, you see that this variable actually contains all of the available satellite types. We can take this data and add it as data on our drop-down components. And you'll see that now every value that is available in our satellite types variable is available in our drop-down as well. But of course, we still need to link our selection to our GQI query. And we can do that by going to the queries and editing our query. In our satellites query, we now want to add a filter because we want to filter on the type. So we say filter. On which column do you want to filter? The type column. It should equal to, and now we will not enter a static value, but we will link it to some data. So we will say link to data. And here we say we want to link it to the drop-down, to the type column, just like that. Now I can say I'm looking for a military something, and our text should contain sky, something like that. Now, you might be wondering, why are we filtering once using the filter on the table directly, and why are we, for the other filter, doing it in the query? Well, the reason is simple. If you do it in the query, that means it's going to be optimized towards the database. That's definitely required for very large data sets, because if you leverage database filtering, that's just very fast. On the other hand, if you have a smaller data set, you can use client-side filtering, which is what happens when you link a text input just to the generic filter of a table. That's a bit the difference between the two. And with this, our first exercise is done. Let me talk about some other controls. First of all, we have our toggle input, which inputs and outputs a Boolean. This is designed to be used with GQI query specifically. Whenever you want to opt in or opt out of a certain functionality, you can use a toggle input. Then we have a time range input, which inputs and outputs a time span. A time span in this case actually being a start time and an end time. In the layout options of our time range inputs, you can say, I want to use quick picks, and quick picks are available below your time range input that to allow users to very quickly select a certain time range. You also have an option to pin something as a quick pick, and that could be, let's say you have the Olympics coming up, which is a certain time range, a specific time range. You can say it starts at this time, ends at that time. Let's pin this one because I'm going to use it a lot in the future. And then you have presets, and presets are time ranges that are available whenever you open the picker component as well. Then you have two functional options, and the first one is the granularity. Perhaps you are not interested in the time component and you're only interested in dates. Well, you can actually configure this with the granularity setting. And then we have also some options to configure how you can edit the value. Should you be able to edit it with the keyboard and by clicking the calendar, or no keyboard, only by clicking the calendar icon. So that's up to you to configure. All right, let's hit another exercise. And for this, we go to the second page, exercise 2. And now we are going to create an event creator. Create new event instances using inputs to provide the necessary information. And we have some data, which are some events that will be displayed in the timeline. And it consists of a name, a start time, an end time, and a live stream. And the assignment is add a text, a toggle, and a time range component to the page. Open the action editor for the add item header button. And in the change variable action, fill in the necessary values using the feeds from the inputs. Use the value of the text input for the name field, the time range for the start and the end fields, and the toggle for the live stream field. Let's have a look. So we have our timeline, and this timeline is using event data. If I go to the variables, you see we have an event. And we also already have 2 values in here as well. So we have the name, start, end, and live stream. Let's add our controls to the page. So the first one was the name for our event. Something like that. We give it the label name. It should be rendered inline. And then we want to add a toggle button, which indicates if it should be a live stream or not. So let's go live stream here. And then we still need to add a time range component. Okay. Now that we have all of these components added, we still need to use the values that they expose. And at the top, you see we have the add item header bar button. And if we click this one, you see that the header bar on the left-hand side expands. We have the add item button, and we can configure the events that is associated with this button. So upon clicking this button, what should happen? Let's go to the configure actions. So in the configure actions, you see that we can already change a variable whenever we click this add item. And we are going to add a row to our events variable. And here we have our 4 columns that we need to provide a value for. So for the name, we are going to link it to our component. So we go text input for the name. And for the start, link to data, we select the time range input. And now we need to still configure, is it the start or the end property that you want? So the from or the to property. So for the start, we'll take 2. Or for the start, we should take from. And then for the ends, we should take 2. All right, and then we need to hook up our live stream toggle button. So we go the toggle button for the live stream. Let's have a look at how this works. So I can say Olympics, which is a live stream. Let's imagine it only takes 3 days. So we select 3 days and we hit add item. And we see that the Olympics are being added. Or I can say World Cup. Let me take another range. And we hit add. And just like that, we add items to our variable, and it immediately is visualized in our timeline as well. That was exercise 2. Lastly, let me talk about actions. Every input actually allows setting the value from outside the component. And we do this through actions. And actions, as you might know, are triggered by an event. What type of action is available to set the value? Well, every input by itself exposes the action to set the value. So that means whenever you add a text input to your page, that text input says to the low-code app framework, hey, I allow other actions to set my value. And for a text input, this can be either a static value or a dynamic value. As you can see in the screenshot, we have a static part, URL filter is, and then we have a dynamic part using text interpolation. All right, let's leverage actions inside our last exercise. So we go to exercise 3, which is the Event Creator 2.0. We can already add events using the Event Creator app, but the inputs are not reset after adding a new item. And this can be improved by using set value actions. The data is the events you created in the previous exercise, so the data set is the same. And the assignment is open the action editor for the Add Item header button, configure a set value action for each input component, set the text input to an empty string, the toggle to false, and link the time range span to the viewport feed of the timeline. And optionally, you can repeat these steps for the reset header button as well. All right, let's have a look. So let's have a look at the problem statement. If I go World Cup, and this takes like a few days, I hit add item, okay, I see, I can click this a few times. This is probably not desired. So we want to reset these inputs whenever we click the add item header bar button. So we have the add item. Let's have a look. On click, what should it do? We have the change variable, so this is like we configured lastly, but now after we have added our row to our variable, we need to reset. And we could do this by using a component action. So we say after changing the variable, so upon completion, we add another action. And here we execute a component action. So let's first reset our toggle button. So our toggle button exposes an action set value, and what should the value be? False. That's one. We do the same thing for our text input, so we execute a component action. I want to, for a text input, set the value and we leave it empty. All right, and then we still need to set or reset our time range input. And for this one, we are going to not set it statically, but we are going to set it to the visible range of our timeline input. So we execute a component action. We want to set the value for the time range. And here we link the from to our timeline. And we take the viewport to the from property like this. And we do the same for the to. So we take timeline, viewport, to, and we link it. And if we have a look, let's do it again, World Cup. We hit live stream. We selected 3 days. So if I hit item, I expect it to be added to the timeline, and then all of my inputs should reset. So let's do it. And we see that the live stream is now false again. Event name has been cleared, and our start and end time is actually the time span visible in our timeline component. So this is actually a full week. And that actually concludes the third exercise. For the assignment for this Empower session, I suggest that everybody takes a screenshot of this page where you have added a few items on your timeline, and you can send that in through DataMiner Dojo. Lastly, I want to thank everybody for watching, and I see you on the next one. Bye-bye.